Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be going through, once again, our series going over each of the characters through builds and tips. So today we've made our way all the way to Lynette. Now talking about Lynette, there's a few different ways that you're going to want to focus on building her. There's two major ways. The first way is going to be support way, which really you're going to probably be doing until you get to C6. And then the way that you're going to build her kind of changes once she hits C6. You're going to go on field with a lot more damage. As you can see, the team lineup is already kind of changed here. So anyways, jumping right first and foremost into her talents, let's look at leveling the different talents, which ones you're going to want to level into pre-C6 as well as once you hit C6 as well. So talking about the first talent you're going to want to focus into is going to be the skill and the burst. Both of these are going to have a higher amount of what you're going to want to level into. In general, you're going to want to focus on both of these damage instances. It's about a good amount of damage, but honestly, the burst is what you're really going to be using her for, especially before she gets to C6. Before she's C6, she's way more of a supportive type character. You're going to be running a viridescent probably on her on the 4-piece to maybe just help a little bit more with the swirls that she's going to be doing to decrease the resistance for your other characters to do more damage. And in general, she can put out some good damage as well, but honestly, between the burst at probably being the highest amount when you're talking about using her as a support. Then you're going to go down into her skill, and then as well, once again, you're probably not going to have to go really into her normal attacks until you get to that C6. The way that it changes if you're not basically building her until she gets to C6 is to level all three of these talents at the same priority, keeping the normal attack and the skill at the highest amounts. The reason why is because the skill does a bunch of damage, and then the normal attacks are going to get an infusion once you get at C6, which we'll talk about in the Constellations section. But first and foremost, talking about her burst, she's going to be throwing out a Boggle Cat box, and this will taunt nearby opponents and attracting their attacks when doing so. Think of kind of something similar to what Sucrose does with her burst, except it'll actually taunt nearby enemies. It also deals anemo damage to nearby opponents at certain intervals, and also like most other anemo bursts that are on field afterwards, when the Boggle Cat box comes into contact with any of these swirlable elements, Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, it'll additionally fire off extra vivid shots that deal damage from that element at certain intervals as well. So as you can see here, you'll be doing anemo damage as well as whatever is swirled, they'll be doing extra damage as well of that. Now it won't be probably as high of a number, as you can see here, the damage difference is a little bit more, plus the original anemo damage is going to be buffed even more due to Lynette's anemo damage bonus that she gets from her ascension. So the numbers might not necessarily be extremely good, but honestly, the biggest reason of using her burst here is not really for personal damage. Once again, until you get to later constellations, really what you're doing here is basically throwing out her burst so that it can be swirled by a different element so that the other characters that are going to be on the team can actually use her 4-piece viridescent, which is probably what you're going to be on. Now looking at her skill, this is the next part called Enigmatic Feint. It states that she will execute an Enigma Thrust while doing so, dealing anemo damage, and when the Enigma Thrust hits an opponent, it will restore Lynette's HP based on her max HP, and then in the 4 seconds afterwards, she will lose a certain amount of HP per second, 4 times. Based on whether you press or hold the ability, this will change Enigma Thrust differently. The press version is just going to be doing the Enigma Thrust, whereas the hold version will allow you kind of like Yelan to go into a high speed, basically like running state, and with this you can apply Shadow Sign to a nearby opponent. You can control her movement like I was stating before, and you can end it prematurely if you use the skill again. When this high speed state ends, Lynette will unleash her Enigma Thrust. If there is a nearby opponent with Shadow Sign already currently applied to them, Lynette will approach them using a flash before using Enigma Thrust, allowing them basically to do more damage because of it. Now, a maximum of 1 opponent can have a Shadow Sign at any one time, and when this opponent gets too far away from Lynette though, the Shadow Sign will be cancelled. She also has the Archeusia aligned to her, which means that after doing the Enigma Thrust in the skill, she will deal Usia aligned anemo damage to the enemy that she hits. So in using that, basically, that's what the skill and that's what the burst are going to do. Her first passive talent states that within 10 seconds after using the burst, when there are 1, 2, 3, 4 elemental types in the party, all party members' attack will be increased by 8, 12, 16, and 20% respectively, meaning the more different types of elemental types you have in the party, the better it is going to be for your team, which is exactly why she works really well on national teams that have different elements to really get a lot of buffs from different places, but also to be giving more attack to a lot of different characters that are going to be scaling on attack. So Lynette's really used for swirlable element characters, but ones that do damage based off of attack, at least at some point in their kit. Looking at the second passive talent, it states that after the Boggle Cat box summoned by the burst performs elemental conversion, basically it'll pick up any of those swirlable elements, Lynette's elemental burst will deal 15% more damage. That is both types of damage that I was talking about, the anemo type of damage as well as whatever swirlable element extra hits they're going to be doing of those vivid shots. This effect will persist until the Boggle Cap box's duration ends. Pretty straightforward when it comes there. Basically, what you're getting at here is more team damage. This is really for more her supportive idea, and this is really more just for her actual extra damage she gets herself in that second passive talent. Going a little bit beyond this, we now want to talk about weapons. There's a lot of, once again, different weapons you're going to want to use because it's going to depend on whether you're using her at C0 or you're going to be using her at C6. Basically, C0 to C5 versus the C6. Once you get to C6, this kind of changes her from an off-field damage character or a viridescent user type idea and really focuses on her being the main damage dealer in the party. So in general, when looking at this first and foremost, honestly, her best weapon as a support, in my personal opinion, is going to be Favonia's Sword. You want a lot of energy recharge because her burst costs 70, but honestly, the biggest reason of her entire kit is just to get her burst back. So getting as much energy recharge on her as possible is going to be great for her as well. So keeping that in mind, when you use Favonia's Sword, honestly, in my personal opinion, it's going to be very good. So make sure to also have a crit rate circlet when we talk about artifacts, specifically when you're using this weapon on her. Another weapon you could use is the Ferryman weapon, which is also energy recharge main stat. And honestly, it increases elemental skill crit rate, which allows her to maybe crit a little bit more often, which may just allow her skill to be a little bit more consistent so that she can make sure to do some extra damage so they can kind of focus on other things. But also the second ability, and the ability is going to be nice to you because it states that it additionally increases energy recharge by 16% for 5 seconds after using the elemental skill, which you're probably going to start by using the skill at the first part of the rotation with her, and then you're going to switch to the burst. So it allows your burst hits to basically at least get some extra energy from everything that it's doing to just basically get more energy for her for easier, faster rotations, plus maybe help your other characters get some energy as well. So Ferryman's a nice weapon. It does have the same main stat as Favonia's Sword as well. So both of these are pretty good and probably tied for some good, at least application-wise. Basically, these two weapons are pretty good. I do like Favonia's Sword more than I like Ferryman, but both of them work pretty well. Another weapon that you could use is Sacrificial Sword. Sacrificial Sword is pretty nice. I wouldn't say it's probably my favorite weapon on Lynette just because, especially the support version, it does have a high amount of energy recharge, and, considering it's keeping about the same energy recharge with Favonia's Sword, it's pretty good. But personally, I just like the ability off of the Favonia's Sword rather than I like the Sacrificial ability, at least for Lynette. For some other characters, it's extremely good, but at least for Lynette, I like Favonia's Sword more, which is why I'm going to be placing Sacrificial as like the third best option to use for her. Some other good weapons you could use are maybe some 5-star weapons, specifically talking about Skyward Blade. Once again, mainly you're really just looking for the high amount of energy recharge that the main stat can give you here. It's going to be giving you like 55.1% at level 90, so Skyward Blade's a pretty nice weapon to go for. And then after you use your burst, it'll increase some movement speed and attack speed. So even if you're going to be using this as the, damage version of her, you could use this as well. Speaking of talking about that damage version though, that was the support Lynette. Talking about damage Lynette, I do want to talk about using Wolffang. For damage Lynette, once you get to that C6, getting Wolffang is going to be pretty good for you. It's a battle pass option weapon. It might be easier than getting some of the other weapons that can be out there. Honestly, Wolffang's really, really good because it increases the elemental skill and burst damage a lot. And then when you use the skill, once you have C6, you get 2 charges of her skill. It'll increase some extra crit rate for her skill, and the same thing with her burst. And you get multiple stacks of it as well. Honestly, I do like Wolffang pretty well for her. Got a nice amount of crit rate on the main stat. It's just a nice weapon when looking overall. Another weapon that you could use, especially through the C6, is the Black Sword. Another battle pass option. Once again, same amount of crit rate in the main stat, but it does increase damage up by normal and charge attack damage, which is the main way that you're focusing on using her when she gets to her C6 because of the Anemo Infusion, and it regenerates some HP based off of her attack when you hit normal and charge attack crits, which once again, this is a crit rate weapon, so it should be pretty easy to hit those crits on her, and you'll be able to heal herself, which once again, basically just helps her keep her HP a little bit higher, even though you're losing it by using your skills and gaining it and losing it as well. There are some 5-star weapons you could even use with her if you really want to, something like Mist Splitter if you kind of either have an extra one or you don't have Ayaka for some reason, you accidentally just got the weapon. If you have an extra one, you could use Mist Splitter. It does help with just an elemental damage bonus, and it's got some good abilities in it, the stats as well. But, the major thing is the high base attack and the crit damage. It's a good stat stick, and it has an okay ability when looking at using it for Lynette. The next thing we want to talk about is looking at artifacts. Once again, 2 major ways that you're looking at when you're actually going to be building Lynette. The first way that you're going to be looking at building her is going to be that support route. So instead of focusing on the Marechaussee, which is more damage route, when you're C0 to C5-ish, you're really going to want to focus on using the 4-piece Viridescent. The major reason why is because the Viridescent states that on the 4-piece, it increases swirl damage by 60%, which in the burst, we can already see how much that does, and then also decreases opponent's elemental resistance to the elements infused in that swirl by 40% for 10 seconds. So opponents that are going to be around you are going to be able to help your other damage dealer, because really in this instance, Lynette's really just a buffer as well as a support character and just some extra damage in general. But honestly, with that burst swirling, whatever element is most likely, hopefully going to be your DPS character, then you can actually do some more damage with them by using the Viridescent set. Another set you could use is something like, 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, which give you some extra energy, which once again, you kind of want some energy to make sure you always have the burst when looking at the support version of her. And she'll increase elemental burst damage, so it helps her get some more damage out, as well as helps her get her burst back. This is a little bit more selfish, but at the end of the day, once again, she can kind of go both off-field DPS type route as well as some supportive characteristics that she has. Another set that you could use if you really want to think about it is looking at Noblesse Oblige. Once again, more damage from the 2-piece, but honestly the 4-piece is once again a little bit more supportive. Once you use your burst, all characters are going to have their attack increased by 20%. Most of the time when using characters with Lynette, they're probably going to be attack scaling characters, so this isn't necessarily a bad 4-piece set either. If in general you're looking for just support Lynette in general, I would honestly just say to combine like a 2-piece of Emblem, a 2-piece of one of these damage stats to just basically get some personal damage out of her. But really, when you're looking at the support version of her, you're going to want to try to get as much of these 4-piece sets as possible to make sure that you can just go for that 4-piece set. Honestly, I do like Viridescent the most with her though. Looking at damage version of Lynette, you can see that I do have the 4-piece Mère Chassé on her, and the reason why is because the C6, like I was talking about before, gives you an elemental infusion with Animo, and that's why the normal and charge attack damage is helpful, but honestly also the 4-piece, when you use the skill, you're increasing and then decreasing your HP. For 4 seconds, you're going to be decreasing your HP 4 times. Here in the 4-piece, it states that when your HP increases or decreases 3 times, it'll increase your crit rate by 12% for each time of that for 5 seconds. She's going to be getting a lot of crit rate just from this 4-piece set, so honestly, doing that is going to be extremely helpful for Lynette when you get to that C6. She's going to be changing HP a lot, never mind if she's, combined with a character like Farina. When talking about a support Lynette, you're going to want to focus on an energy recharge sands, once again, specifically on the Viridescent set, probably, or Noblesse, or whatever I talked about before for the supportive type 4-piece sets. You're going to want energy recharge on the sands. You're going to want to go for an Animo damage bonus goblet either way, or you can go for attack percent, honestly, whichever one you have, if you have something on set that could be helpful to help with the 4-piece. But honestly, either Animo damage bonus or attack percent, she ascends into Animo damage bonus, so I could see why someone would change to go for an attack percent, or even something like an elemental mastery type idea if you're just trying to maybe get some more swirl damage. But honestly, Animo damage bonus or attack percent are going to be favored for you. Looking at the circlet, if you want to get more of a supportive version of her and you do have Favonia's sword, which you should be having, you're going to want to go on a crit rate circlet just so that you can focus a little bit more on making sure that you're always critting so that you can get more particles out and really making full use of that ability on the weapon. If you have another weapon though, even still, I would probably just go attack percent or something like that if you don't care about your crit ratio. If you do care about your crit ratio, just grab crit where you need it. When you're looking at damage Lynette though, honestly, you can look right here, go attack percent sands, go Animo damage bonus or attack percent goblet. And then for the circlet, you're going to want to go either crit rate or crit damage, mainly just focusing on making sure you're balancing out your crit ratio on whatever you have here. Do keep in mind, once again, if you are going for a crit type of build and you do have the 4-piece Mère Chassé, you can go a little bit more into crit damage because you will be getting 36% pretty easily of crit rate from the 4-piece Mère Chassé from her. It's not that hard to really trigger for her. Now we're going to be taking a look at Constellations. Looking at the first constellation, it states that when the skill's Enigma Thrust hits an opponent with Shadow Sign, a vortex will be created at that opponent's position, and that will also pull nearby opponents in. So basically what it's talking about here is when you are hold version on the skill and you put Shadow Sign on an opponent, and after you come out of it and then do Enigma Thrust, you will then obviously be jumping back to it. If you did that hold version, you'll jump back to the character or enemy that had Shadow Sign on them, and then after you do so, then it'll create a vortex near you, basically just allowing you to be in a better position to pull out other characters or whatever to do more damage, or even personally her, once again, if you have the later constellations. Looking at the second constellation, it states that whenever the Boggle Cap box from the burst fires a vivid shot, it will fire an extra vivid shot as well, basically just allowing a little bit more damage from her burst from off field. The C3 states that it increases the level of the burst by 3, and then the C4 increases the skill's charge by 1, so you'll have 2 charges instead of 1, which once again makes everything a little bit easier to constantly be changing your HP for Mère Chassé, and keeps her on field a little bit longer while doing so. The 5th constellation increases the level of the skill by 3, which once again, just some extra damage instances there, especially from that Enigma Thrust. And the C6 states that when Lynette uses her skill's Enigma Thrust, she will gain an Animo Infusion and 20% Animo damage bonus for 6 seconds. Once again, once you get to the C6, you could either go full force into Animo damage bonus like I did, or probably more preferably, you could go for an attack percent goblet to just really kind of balance out, because you might be going a little bit too far into Animo damage bonus like I am at the moment. So honestly, when you get here, this is once again, like I was talking about, getting really to having her on field as a damage dealer, kind of putting her on par with someone like Hazo or something like that. It's a little bit easier to use her with, and she actually puts out some pretty good damage. Now, looking a little bit beyond Constellations, let's talk about the teams you're going to use with Lynette. Now, as you can see here, the teams I already kind of have set up are talking really most and first and foremost about having her as the driver on the team. So this is a little bit more focused on the C6 version of her. But in general, you could be using someone that's a little bit more easy to use or something like that. Let's say you don't have Kazuha, and you might have some other characters to maybe help a driver on the team. If you really want to, I usually put my driver first. Some supports that are going to basically be helping Raiden. If my Lynette was on a 4-piece Viridescent, this would be a good way to kind of use her to be increasing Raiden's extra damage and increasing kind of Kujusara's if she swirls Electro as well in that burst instance. Also, because of the attack increases that, Lynette can give through her kit as we saw it, this is going to be helping Raiden get more damage as well, because it's increasing the attack of most party members as well. So this is a nice way to go about things. You could go for a national type team as well. So if you switch this over to someone a little bit more free to play, kind of like instead of Yelan, someone like Xingqiu, it's multiple different elements in the party, which means that you can get even more attack buff from Lynette, hopefully swirling that Electro once again in the burst so that Raiden can get the Viridescent buff, and you'll be doing some extra Electro damage from Lynette's burst as well with those Vivid shots. So in general, this is a kind of supportive team that you're going to be looking for. She really just basically gets in the way of someone else that is going to be kind of focusing on needing a swirler or a Viridescent swirler in the team. And so using her in that team is going to be kind of best. Something like this could work as well. A recent character like Arlecchino, swirling once again the Pyro to just get the buff from the Viridescent and doing some extra Pyro damage from off field. Making sure you also have your character that can do the, Vaporize for you, but honestly making sure that Lynette is buffing Arlecchino as much as possible. So honestly, there's a lot of different ways to go about really using Lynette as a support character, as long as she's supporting a character in a team that is focusing on, swirling a specific element. And then that allows you to do a little bit more in terms of kind of what your team is looking like, whether it's a freeze team idea or something that's a little bit more focused on Vaporize like I was showing earlier. But when talking about the C6 version of her, going into a lot more damage focused ideas, the character that you're going to want to pair her with, which honestly most of the characters that are focused on just doing the increasing and helping other Animo damage dealers, is going to be Farazan. The reason why is because Farazan helps a lot with her specific burst to help a lot of characters do more damage. This isn't really a kind of way to increase and talk about Farazan, but she decreases Animo resistance of enemies as well as gives an Animo damage bonus to her party members as well. So honestly, in general, these two together are extremely good. If you want another character, basically, once again, you're trying to buff maybe more attack from, Lynette's passive talent. So grabbing some other elements is going to be positive for you. Even though you might get a little bit less attack, the amount of buffs that Farazan can give compared to that one passive talent that kind of changes attack by a very little bit, Farazan's going to help a lot more with that. So once again, talking about another character that could buff, in general as well, help with swirling, help with just damage increases as well. Once you're on that C6 with the, Mersase, this is a great kind of lineup that I'm going to be using most of the time. This is a lot of fun. You could even switch out someone like Yelan. Once again, I was talking about earlier with Farina. Farina does extremely well to buff the entire party, as well as, once again, changing HP a lot, so that can allow Lynette to get the most out of the 4-piece Mersase. Even if her skills aren't ready, she's still getting the crit rate increase. Well, in general, a lot of everything that's coming out here is pretty good. The biggest thing is you're just trying to basically pair these two characters together and having supports to kind of buff Lynette at the end of the day. So honestly, once again, my favorite team is still probably going to be this team right here if you're really looking at that C6 version of her. In terms of Lynette, when looking at her, I would say it's really not very useful to necessarily build her if you don't have her C6. There's a lot of other, Animo characters that are out there. Kazuha, Sucrose, Venti, Jean, who are going to be better for you in terms of using a Viridescent set. Jean's a healer. Venti has a lot better of a pull ability. Someone like Kazuha can also give an elemental damage bonus to any element that he swirls. So characters that are going to be, more useful for that Viridescent slot. Personally, for me, if Lynette's your only animal character on the, on your account, then yes, you can build her if she's C0 to C5 or whatever as a Viridescent, kind of supportive unit. And even if she's C6, you don't have to force her into this role. You can still use her in the Viridescent slot. Usually, though, I just like to put other characters in that slot, but once again, if you are kind of handicapped and have to use her as a Viridescent user, that's not really a problem. Once again, the biggest part is always focusing on helping your main damage dealer, so if you're using her with Raiden, like I was showing earlier, or Arlecchino, or Neuvillette, for instance, making sure they do more damage is better than kind of focusing only on Lynette's damage. This is more or less a fun team. This isn't necessarily going to do, crazy things in terms of, 12-3 in the Spiral Abyss, but it's something fun to do that we can see when a character gets to C6 with these 4 stars. Well, that's everything I've got talking about Lynette, talking about if she's a little bit more focused either on the damage route, on that C6 route, or if you kind of have her on some earlier constellations and you kind of want to build her more of a supportive route. She can still do some damage good ways. It just kind of depends on how you build her. She can put out some good damage and she's kind of fun to use as a character. And even for exploration, her skill can be used quite fun as well. That's everything I've got for this video talking about Lynette. If you guys like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.